let's go straight into it. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back, folks, to WP-Tonic this week in WordPress and SaaS. Friend and old co-host John Locke with me. Andrew is recovering from a party. I had the sense to go home early. Andrew didn't have the sense. He continued, and I consequences, tribe. But I had to get myself prepared for you, tribe. And John, my friend, agreed to be my co-host and backup. So, John, thank you for agreeing to do this with me.
Of course.
Would you like to introduce yourself to the Thursday tribe?
For those who don't know me, I'm John Locke, and I run a small SEO and web agency, Lockdown SEO.
And John not only runs his own business, but he helps me with a few of my projects. I always rely on John, and so can you. He is not only that, he really cares about his work. So what we're going to be discussing in this episode, in Europe, folks, I have hit Porto in Portugal. I'm going to quickly discuss with John what's it like to have a live WordCamp event, the biggest in Europe. And then we're just going to have a of where we think WordPress is in the second quarter of 2022. Before we go into the main part of this discussion, we've got my main sponsors. We'll be back in a few moments. We're coming back, and I'd just like to point out that we've got some great special offers from our major sponsors. Plus, I've got some great recommendations for Pacific WordPress plugins and services, all utilized by myself or by my quality, all rock solid. If you want to have a look at these recommendations, all you have to do is go to WP-Tonic/recommendations, and all the goodies will be there. So, John, I'm in Porto. It's been almost 3 years since the last WordCamp I went to. Registration was today, and I mingled. And it was just nice got it in a really wild garden with peacocks surrounding, and they're making a bit of a noise, John. The peacocks are screaming. What do you reckon about that, John?
Sounds great. Where I grew up in far north California, I had a person up the road from me who had a peacock farm, like a little one. So yeah, I can relate. Sounds great. I mean,
yeah, how do you know? They're noisy, aren't they?
They can be, yeah, for sure.
One had a go at me, John. He got a bit iffy with me. Started pecking my shoe. There we go. Yes, I didn't respond. I thought he looked a bit mean and tough, actually. So I think what we do is, it really struck me, had people all over Europe, like I say, Porto. It's my first time to Portugal, my first time to Porto. It seems a great city. The Portuguese seem pretty chilled out. Everybody I've met here has been friendly and helpful, even though some of my questions have been really dumb. And it's really great, actually, to be at a live WordCamp. In some ways, it's a bit cliche, but it definitely has been one of the major drivers in the success of WordPress in general. Would you agree with that, John?
The WordCamp's a lot. I think it's one of the major drivers. I think the community has always been a driver. The developers and agencies who have recommended to their clients that they use WordPress. And even as 6.0 has just launched, it's still the best CMS going right now. So, yeah, I think it's a big thing to have the community back together again. WordCamps are getting back to normal. I think the WordCamp US is coming up pretty soon as well. But I think it's great for the community to be able to see each other face to face again.
Yeah, I think obviously I'm doing my own virtual event at the end of September aimed at membership. So I still think because to go to a WordCamp, the US one, it's prices, it's going to be a lot of people going to be thinking about it, and I haven't seen my family in the UK, so after the event, I'm going to be flying to London to see my extended family, which I haven't seen for almost 4 years now. So but it was a hell of a journey for me to get to Porto. But what also has amazed me, the amount of sponsors and companies I've never heard of, John, that are sponsoring the event. And obviously, I do a podcast, and so you keep your ears peeled. It still amazes me. There were, obviously a lot of them are European-based WordPress companies, plugins, other services. But what struck me is just the size of the market. I think we just, in America, even though I originate from Britain, we tend not to understand how global WordPress is. What's your thoughts about that, John?
I wholeheartedly agree that I think, especially in the U.S., we kind of tend to focus on just the U.S. centric companies, and our coverage and our attention is mostly on um, the U.S. Things, but there's all sorts of companies in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, and everywhere else that are South America that are all part of WordPress, and they're all very important to the ecosystem. And we're very proud of this 45% of the web, or whatever it is. But that's not just the US. That's everywhere. So I think it's good to get that perspective from time to time and realize that we are part of a larger community and not just a US based community.
Yeah, no, I really see it as one of the strengths and one of the sunnier places in the WordPress land at the moment. It definitely has become, over the past 5 to 7 years, a lot more international. It's the Premier plugin. It's definitely become less US focused, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean that is definitely correct. There are like very thriving communities in a lot of different places that don't always show up on the U.S. radar. I think outside of um, a couple channels like Hero Press, which highlight developers and developers and users from different parts of the world. We don't really get to hear about them a lot unless it's some sort of product acquisition or some breakout product that's happening. And even then, I think we miss a lot of the communities that are thriving around the world.
Yeah, because what also the actual event, it's like I say, the first day it was registration, and also if you wanted to contribute, it was a day where they split up into various. But the catering, the basic organisation, they've got a lot of people attending, and the basic the catering was top notch. That's also to do with it being based in Portugal. What struck me about Portugal, just to obviously it's an old colonial country, a bit like England, a bit isolated from the rest of Europe because the mountains that separate it from Spain. It developed through colonisation, i.e., its major, apart from its African colonies, its major colony was Brazil in the New World, which, apart from the rest of South America, which speaks Spanish, speaks Portuguese, and has close connections with I think the term is the mother country. I might be incorrect, but you can see this in Porto, the buildings, all the money that was sucked out of materials, the export of slavery to Brazil. I think Porto was one of the epicenters of all that trade. Fascinating. But let's get back, because I'm wandering, but let's get back to WordPress. So we're in the second quarter, we're getting over COVID. Where do you feel in your own heart and, your member of the Friday show, you've been part of it from the beginning, really. Where do you think WordPress is in the second quarter 2022, John? Only a slide.
Well, I think that WordPress, the project, I think it's really at kind of a turning point. I have seen a lot of people say that they're excited for full site editing. I've seen many people say that they like the block system, the block editor, that they're diving into React. I've seen a few people say that it's kind of frustrating that it's been this long. I've seen a few people saying that working on sites for clients is kind of frustrating with this editor. I think some people are getting discouraged that it's taken a while to integrate these different features into this product. But I think there's a sense of that's going around the community of who is this product really for? Because in my observation, WordPress grew because developers advocated for it. It was developer friendly. It was extensible through custom development or themes or plugins. And in 2022, it seems like the project itself is going a direction where it's going toward no code. And it seems like it's trying to compete with Wix, Squarespace, and Shopify specifically, because those seem to be the biggest competitors for market share. Shopify being a competitor to WooCommerce, and Wix and Squarespace being at the low end. With some of the things, and I'm sure we'll discuss this tomorrow on the Friday show, but WordPress.com, like introducing this $5 plan, different things that are going on. Jetpack is actually becoming modular again. A lot of the legacy companies being bought up by WP Engine. I don't know if you saw this, but Delicious Brains was just all their plugins were basically acquired by WP Engine.
No,
yeah, that just happened.
I'm going to have to change one of the Fridays.
Yeah.
Thanks for. Obviously, that's news to me because I've been in Europe.
But basically, it's a sense of like, where is this going? But the overall sense that I get is this is the best CMS unless there's something else that comes along. The people that I've seen that are saying that they're going to move to something else, some of the more developer centric people are moving towards Staymatic. Uh, the people who are familiar with Laravel, um, but it's still definitely better than a lot of the solutions out there. But I think it really is at a turning point of um, I think Automatic and the contributors that are out there, they're doing a great job. I think it's just a sense of where it's going from here.
Well, we've got second part where we continue this, but I've really been thinking about this, John, and I just think there's got a river, but there's conflicting tides in the river or in the estuary, and this has caused confusion. Obviously, you've got the professional developer, the kind of quasar graphic designer. You got different elements that are quite sizable that make up the total WordPress community. You've got the agencies, and then you've got the individual, and you've got the small business owner or the individual that wants to build something themselves. And these different audiences and their different requirements have at various times at stages chosen to utilize WordPress, partially because the competition was comparatively poorer than WordPress, and secondly, that WordPress, the plugin ecosystem and its extendability and price and just the ecosystem, the massive system of themes and plugins and individuals that could help, was extremely attractive to people. And I still think the fundamentals are still there, John. I think the decision that Automatic made, that was made almost 4 years or 5 years ago, that the real focus was going to be around JavaScript and React, was extremely controversial. Obviously, Laravel and the improvement to PHP has occurred also. So some of the PHP through modern frameworks like Laravel have been solved, but the reality also was JavaScript and the whole ecosystem populated by UX and modern web development was increasingly turning to JavaScript frameworks, in storing data, being more responsive, being able to build more modern applications, which in some ways is out of the scope of WordPress. With the bulk of WordPress websites, they won't be needing the requirements of a web-based application that would probably be looking to build through React or Angular or one of the other popular JavaScript libraries. But I think the reason why they chose to go down that route was that increasingly WordPress was being siloed. A lot of web developers were looking at WordPress, looking at its PHP base, looking at the technology behind it, and was saying this is out of date. This is somewhere we don't really can be now. the skills that we need to learn, where we might be doing some WordPress as a hobby or a form of income, but we got our main job during the day where we're working in JavaScript, we can't really utilize the same skills. I think the leadership in increasingly seen WordPress was going to be siloed, and that was one of the reasons why, and there was various other technical issues. So I'm more understanding of why that choice, but it has made, if you want to become a plugin or do hardcore WordPress work, the skill level and the knowledge. One of the strengths of WordPress is that there was definitely a road that many went down where they started off with CSS and HTML, and then they gradually learned WordPress functions, and they learned some PHP, and they learned of jQuery, and you could do a lot. But that was also, if you wanted to move further, these skills were very easy to increase, where you could build plugins. There seems to be more of a divorce, more where you're really going to have to move your skills. These skills I've just outlined are still very relevant with client work or a certain level work. But if you want to move up, you literally got to learn a really stiffer mountain to climb. Am I waffling, or is there some truth in what I'm saying, John?
Yeah. Okay. So what you're bringing up is something that I think is important to touch on. When WordPress was primarily a PHP based CMS like Drupal or Joomla or Expression Engine, the one thing that allowed it to grow and allowed people to develop on it and recommend it to clients is there is a lot of documentation around the functions, around the hooks and filters and different things that you would use to develop with it. And in the 5 years or so since the Gutenberg project and the block editor has been being built out, there's not as much documentation about how to do things. This is a severely lacking need. And this is part of the frustration right now. I don't know if it's a lack of resources or a lack of volunteers. I don't think there's as many like people volunteering like time for free as there were in the past. But that is a need that needs to be addressed if they want to continue the growth and continue the adoption of the block editing system, is having complete documentation to where when people go to solve a problem or figure out how to do things with full site editing or the block editor or whatever aspect of WordPress 6, is they have to have this documentation shored up. That's a big part of it. When you talk about like talent, like drawing talent, and that's another great thing that you bring up, is part of the decision maybe was if we move this toward JavaScript frameworks like React, then we'll be able to attract talent because that's kind of the hot thing versus PHP. Though it's like reliable, a lot of things are still built on PHP. Like,
well,
yeah.
I think we need to go for our break, and we'll
Okay,
continue this. We come back. We'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back, folks. I'm enjoying the discussion with my friend John. We're doing a bit of dive about, where is WordPress in the second quarter 2022. Hopefully we're not boring you. I've enjoyed the discussion. Hopefully you have. Before we go into the second part, I just want to remind folks that I do a great newsletter. It's based on the discussion, the Friday show, which is a roundtable show. We've got a special show coming up tomorrow. I'll be telling you more about that at the end of this particular show, even though you'll be listening to it next week. So I probably won't do that because it's probably, but you do, in general, you want to join us live on the Friday show anyway. Also do a newsletter which you can get every Monday. You can sign up for that. I do a personalized editorial, and I also comment on one of the major stories that we discuss on the Friday show. You can get that by going to WP-Tonic newsletters, WP-Tonic/newsletter. Sorry I had to break that up, but I thought it was time to go for the break. I think it was also because I think for obvious reasons and understandable reasons, the WordPress project founded, it's its 19th birthday. I think that was Matt Malik and is it Martin Little?
Mike Little.
Mike Little, I always get that wrong. I think they did a little piece, wasn't they? And it's always been developer driven, and I think another reason why was linked to what I said and what you were saying is that it's been very important that to those that are the most influential in Automatic and WordPress, that it's seen part of the bigger web development community, and I think that it's always been a bit of a silo because fundamentally, like all these CRMs like Drupal, Joomla, Expression Engine, they have always been driven by hooks and filters and PHP functions. So the way of developing is always been a bit different because you had to learn the kind of WordPress way. A good PHP developer, you didn't have to do that, but it was really obvious if you were taking over a project because it tended not to be utilizing the full power of the platform. But then I think one of the key things is, will there be tools? And you mentioned at the beginning that, and I have to check up the story, that Delicious Brains has, been bought out by WP Engine. I'm not totally surprised, actually. I didn't hear anything on the grapevine about it, but I think Delicious Brains have been, earlier on in the year, they made that email with one of the founders that caused a lot of controversialism, didn't it? And I think they were struggling with the of custom fields, weren't they, from Elliot? And I'm not totally surprised that they sold in a way. But I think that's a very key technology, and that's one of the things that needs, which is linked to what your statement about a lack of documentation and using React. It's just, if you look at, I'm not in any way an active developer, but I like to watch what's going on. And if you watched any online videos about modern web development, about utilizing React and all the building tools, it's very much an object-orientated development where you could do PHP as object-orientated as well. It tended to be at a high level of developer, and you didn't have to utilize object-orientated PHP. it could be more function and more linear based, more classic methodology, which is easier to learn if you're doing it rather than trying to learn an objective framework. I think one of the key things, John, is are there going to be the tools available? And custom fields is one of them, pods is another. Are there going to be a number of tools that to utilize blocks and develop products where you don't have to become a full knowledgeable React developer? If you're having to do that, you can get much better paid jobs by being a React developer. There's a shortage, you know. Am I waffling, or is there something to what out, John?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So with ACF fields, you can create Gutenberg blocks for the block editor. That's definitely a thing. There's a story that Brian Cords from Master WP put out this morning, talking about people, leaving WordPress, comparing it to people leaving California for states like Texas or Idaho, and saying, yeah, there's going to be a few people leaving, but the community is still pretty strong, and the project is still pretty strong. Blocks is basically you're using JSON instead of PHP to create basically objects. But I think I would, I'm going to spin this a different way, and I think the challenge with WordPress as it approaches its second decade is we see a lot of these early pioneers exit. And by the way, Delicious Brains is not acquired. It's just their plugins as far as I can tell.
Right.
But a lot of these early creators that were driving the tools, a lot of them are selling or exiting to hosting companies or larger companies. And I think the challenge with this phase of WordPress is going to be attracting new talent and attracting the next wave of entrepreneurs and developers and talent. And I think that there's a natural process that's going on right now where this is becoming more of a global market, and it's becoming more open to everyone. Where I think is before, like a lot of it was US and Europe based and Asia. But I think it's now it is everywhere, and there are thriving communities everywhere that are innovating with this. And I think the old plugin system, a lot of people are pivoting to things that are based on the block editor. So I think we're going to see more of that in this next phase of WordPress, like as far as like product development, as far as the code-based development. I still.
Well, I want to wrap up the podcast. So you're okay that we have some bonus content, because I want to discuss. I want to discuss two things in the bonus content. That is full site editing, and also the onboarding experience, because I think these are two crucial areas that need some discussion and maybe a different direction. But we are just commentators. We got no power. But please join us for this bonus content. You'll be able to watch the whole interview. Obviously, it's the Thursday interview show, Tribe. But my discussion with John. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Please leave some comments on either in iTunes or at the WP-Tonic YouTube channel if you're watching this. Like I say, you'll be able to watch the whole interview on the WP-Tonic YouTube channel. Please leave some comments, give us some feedback. That would be great about what we've discussed during this episode. So, John, what is the best way for people to find out more about you, your services, and what you're based?
Best place to find me is at lockdownseo.com and also on YouTube, Lockdown SEO.
And thanks for jumping in today. And like I say, Andrew's suffering from his activities last night. I had more sense. I was tucked up in bed, folks, with my cocoa and my slippers. We'll see you next week. Andrew should be back. We've got to be a great interview. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye. So we're coming back, John. So I think the other thing in the podcast part of the show is full site editing. I agree with our Friday show panelist, Spencer. I think that full site editing is a little bit pragmatic. I'm not sure if I told Spencer, but I think I can in a way, because I think it's extremely confusing. I think also some of the problems with Gutenberg have not only been about trying to build on legacy software and utilize JSON and top of this legacy framework, which I feel obviously revert, keeping the promise that that old versions of WordPress are going to be updatable, blah, blah, blah. But I think you can take that too far. That's been one of the problems, because I think it might have been opportune to have taken that Gutenberg a cut-off point where if you wanted to utilize it, it was going to be version 2.0 of WordPress. But I also think full site editing and getting away from the meta is problematic, and is causing and will increasingly cause. And so I think the other factor, John, is that I think for understandable reasons, and I talked to a lady last week that trains learners, is that the UX design is okay, developer kind, and you're utilizing some additional third-party plugins and themes like Cadence or the Astra Gutenberg theme, what they've renamed it, actually. I apologize. But I think the interface design has caused a lot of confusion for the non-power user. What's your thoughts about all this, or am I waffling, John?
No, I think the consensus is that full site editing is still an alpha product. It's not a finished product by any means. As far as the classic editor and the classic blocks, like the classic editor is not gonna go away for a while, despite like what they've been telling you, because the block editor in Gutenberg is not finished by any means. That's the frustration that I think a lot of people are expressing, is they thought that this product would be further along by now. And
Yeah.
it might have been if they had just developed this from scratch, like basically made a 2.0 or a fork. But I don't think that they would have had the developer support from the community.
Yeah.
And I think that was, well, that's the big decision. And I think also too, like this product is really being developed for WordPress.com ultimately. But I think, and in fact, I know that like most of the actual percentage of like websites on the web that are WordPress, that's all self-hosted. But the full site editing, I mean, it's they have to make steps. I mean, it's definitely like an alpha product. I don't know that I still know agencies that are using you know, they're not ready for full site using full site editing on a live client project yet. But it's coming along. I mean, you know, all progress has to be made incrementally. I think the block system is better. I think the UX could be better. I think there is still there's a lot of people that are frustrated with that. I think sometimes when you're converting like classic WordPress sites to blocks, there's a lot of errors that happen sometimes.
Yeah, do you think, because everything it's fine for me to point out these problems, and I think it's legitimate to do it, but we've got to take also into account, or you don't have to, is that everything we're discussing is not easy. You know, UX design is, if UX design was easy, everybody would be doing good UX design, but we go to the majority of apps or websites, they're not very well UX designed, are they? Updating code, updating work that's driving over 40% of websites, everything we discussed is not easy, is it?
No, it's basically you're pivoting like one type of editing to another. And it's a monumental engineering task. And that's why I say I think part of the problem is like a lot of it is the people who are doing active contribution. It's mostly automatic. Some from some of the larger companies like Yoast. And then some of the companies that are still doing like five for the future, where they're paying their own payroll to advance.
Yeah, because I think that's been one of the, because it's all kind of linked, like most things are, like these bigger problems, they tend to have different elements. I think you just touched on something that's really important, because the decision to move to React actually reduced the amount of community involvement possible through the technology of at the same time utilizing a more advanced, that's probably not the correct word, because Laravel and PHPs are there's plenty of Laravel jobs, and most of the web is based on PHP in reality, what kind of sector you're looking at. So advanced is probably not the right word, but a new technology, a new framework, it had consequences anyway, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's a major undertaking. Yeah, anything like this where you're moving from one type of development to another.
Because you're limiting the pool of people that can help you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think their idea was like trying to attract new developers, or like encouraging people to learn the development to be able to contribute. But you know, people have different aptitudes, and programming is definitely, you can pick up like different programming languages, but there is definitely like some things that people feel more comfortable in, or they just have a general aptitude for certain things. More so, but I think the thought was that they would be attracting more React developers, because that was a hot thing.
Yeah, I never thought that was going to happen, because there's a general shortage of React developers in general, and they're not the type that do the kind of bread and butter kind of that a self-employed freelance, small to medium size freelancer does. It's a kind of different world, isn't it, John?
Yeah, it is a very much like a different world when it comes to that.
I think the other thing I want to finish off, John, because I really appreciate you jumping on board, because I didn't plan enough. The actual onboarding experience, because I've been talking to a couple of people, had a couple informal meetings, and I will probably be discussing this a bit more tomorrow, maybe next week, is that there are some developments, there's some new products that are going to attempt work with one of the weaknesses of WordPress compared to Wix or Squarespace, or some of them like Java, more specialized competitors, and I would say even Shopify experience of somebody trying to get a WordPress membership website or trying to get commerce compared to Shopify. It's always going to be a bit more but one of the things I think that's really fallen behind is building experience about the whole setup of getting something. If you're not going to employ a developer to get it up for you, it's definitely in UX design, and the general experience, onboarding experience is definitely fallen behind as competitors. Do you thinking what I've just said, John?
Well, I think right now, I think definitely Shopify is WooCommerce's biggest competitor, and there are advantages and drawbacks to each of WooCommerce and Shopify. And Shopify is a more JavaScript based templating system, but there are pluses to it as well as there are drawbacks to using either of them. I think some of the things that Shopify does as far as having APIs that can be tapped into for connecting different pieces.
Yes,
Of like an enterprise.
That's
system.
something definitely to be improved when it comes to WooCommerce, isn't it?
Yeah, that's.
But I meant also the general on board. If you set up, improved enormously. Actually, I think it's rather controversial because I don't really have a lot bit with Squarespace. I actually think what I've observed that Wix is probably outgunning the onboarding experience. What do you think about that statement?
I think there's definitely something that we can learn from each of these competitors when it comes to onboarding, because there is definitely a large part of the market for WordPress that is aimed at the novice crowd or people who are DIY. And I think it would be very helpful to study some of the competitors like Wix or Squarespace and how what things they're doing to make it easier for customers to.
Well, the other factor, just to finish off, is this fixation, and I'm not having a pop at them, I'm just pointing out the obvious. There seems to be, because you at the beginning of our discussion that that Automatic have this quasi fascination with Jetpack and promoting it, then they backed off, and you've seen, and also I had a couple of people remark today about it, that it seems this modularization, this love affair with Jetpack is back on. Myself, I see it as a bit of a red. Seen it that way. What's your, just to finish off, John? What's your response to that?
I mean, I used to use Jetpack for different things, 5 or 6 years ago, but I don't really actively use it in development, just because there's like more confusion like with it, where to use Jetpack you have to have a WordPress.com account.
Yeah.
And it's just like one more thing that you have to set up, and the clients don't always know how to do that, and it's just one more thing to manage.
Well, it's really linked to what we were saying before this last thing, the onboarding experience. It makes the onboarding experience a little bit worse, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's things in there that are good, but you can almost always find something that's also works that's a standalone plugin. And if I have the choice, I'm going to use a standalone plugin that does one thing excellently rather than a Swiss Army knife of 40 plugins. And I know that you can turn them on and off, and I get that, but I don't know. It's kind of clunky. It's not my first choice.
Well, it's pragmatic, and it's always been a contradiction. It's not been. These are just my honest opinion, folks. It's never been really thought out, in my opinion, and I do see it as a bit of a red herring. To me, it's a bit of a dead end. But who do I know? Well, John, I think we're going to wrap it up now. Thanks for your time. I've really enjoyed it, actually, John. I think to say that we covered this particular show would be an understatement. So we're going to end it now, folks. We'll see you next week. Like I say, Andrew should have recovered. We've got a great guest. Please join us next week. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.